Good morning. It's morning here in the UK. Welcome to the second episode of Keyhole Storytelling, the show that is inspired by the movie Doctor Strange, and in particular the line, "You're a man looking at the universe through a keyhole." And that stayed with me, and I'm on a quest really to identify blind spots and just to see what other ways there are of being in the world. So I asked guests who I don't know very well at all. My guest today is Scott, and he is a photographer. He's in Cumbria, and that's all I know. You must have added me on Facebook, or added you at Facebook at some point, but we'll get into it a bit later. The reason I asked him is he dropped an amazing knowledge bomb about science fiction, and I thought, oh, you have some interesting points of view. So Scott, welcome to the show, and if you could just give us your kind of Dungeons and Dragons character avatar version of yourself. Like, who are you playing right now?
Sure. Firstly, thank you ever so much for having me on. And yeah, it was kind of a random way that we met. I think it was through some business conferencing event. We ended up talking, and then I added you on Facebook. And yeah, you were quite right. It's quite a remote thing that happened. And I guess in terms of the role that I play, in terms of what I do and who I am. So yeah, I'm a photographer. Essentially, I help brands and organizations to build their kind of their visual footprint using digital content. So I work exclusively business to business. I am originally from Yorkshire. I was born in Scarborough on the East Coast, and over the last however many 30 plus years, I have managed to find my way over here. I've been in Cumbria for 2 years now, and decided to go self-employed, and as well as being a photographer, I also am a digital illustrator and a graphic designer as well. But I have many interests, as I'm sure you have probably ascertained already. And yeah, so that's me. I make visuals basically. That's what I do. Yeah.
That's superb. 2 years in Cumbria. I followed a girl up here, I think about 10, 15 years ago, and I still don't think I'm accepted as a Cumbrian. It takes a while.
I did that about 2 years ago. Yeah, so yeah, my partner got a job here, so I basically said, okay, that's fine. It's a pretty part of the country, and it was just the 220-mile commute every day that was kind of doing it, and we weren't getting to live together. So I decided to move my life up here, and yeah, and that's that. And I'm enjoying it. You know, it's a beautiful part of the country. It's got clean air. It's got blue skies, and a good proportion of the time at least. Yeah. And yeah, it's great, and the people are lovely. They're so friendly.
So photography, I've got a background in filmmaking and a little bit of photography, and I think the same thing happened with photography has happened to filmmaking, is that all of a sudden, because of technology, which is amazing, it democratized it and it gave us access, particularly as filmmakers, because there was financial and technological barriers when I first started making film, in terms of just being able to make a film or edit. I was on the verge. That digital had just come in, so I did learn to kind of edit on film a little bit. So my thoughts with photography, likewise with film, is all of a sudden everyone thinks they're a filmmaker.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'll see people be like, "Oh, I'm starting a wedding videography company." I'm like, "Oh, do you know anything about filmmaking?" "Oh no, but I've got a camera." And the same thing has happened with photography. It's like everyone's a photographer now, and what that does, it floods the market. It means you have, partly my fault, is you have students coming out of university who are then undercutting everyone and being like, "Oh, I'll do this shoot for this much." So how's that impacted you? And I guess what I want to get to is, what's the difference? So how can someone tell the difference between a good photographer and someone who just has a camera?
It's, this is a discussion I end up having on such a regular basis with people. And the thing that it comes down to for me is there's a degree of consistency that comes with experience, and there's pitfalls in that as well, because if someone's been doing the same thing for 30 years, then there's also complacency creeping in potentially. So you know, when you work in the industry, you're constantly learning. You're never done learning. And, you know, your bookshelf is always expanding and your YouTube tabs are always growing because you're always looking at what other people are doing. And there's some incredible talent out there, genuinely. This has been, and this last few years has been an explosion of creativity across all of the creative arts, but primarily in visual content making, in terms of photography and video work and animation. That technology, as you say, has become so much more you know, obtainable, and you know, you can now go and buy kits, you know, a weekend special from a catalog store like Argos or something like that, or John Lewis, and you can literally walk in, buy a camera kit that comes with a couple of lenses that are actually really not that bad in terms of quality, and the camera gear that you will get is far and away anything beyond what we had 20 years ago in terms of top end production equipment, you know, digital production equipment, shall we say, just purely based on the fact that with every generation of technology, it's Moore's law. You know, every generation of technology comes around in half the time and it's twice as powerful. And so, yeah, it also becomes half the price. So it becomes more easily obtained by consumers. Now, you mentioned a flooding of the market, and yes, the market has become saturated in recent years. That in itself poses lots of problems. You know, it devalues the professional sort of creative work base. The people that have been doing this for decades suddenly find themselves, you know, in what was a shallow, you know, wadable pond. Suddenly they're in a lake that is, you know, almost bottomless, and they're in the middle of it from shore to shore, and it's it's filled with people who desperately want to create something. And what I always say to people is that you have to be technically proficient, but you also have to have that creativity. Creativity can be learned, but the two have to go hand in hand. So learning your craft is so vitally important. Going to university is a great path for many people. It actually wasn't for me. I do have a degree now, but when I started a university degree, it wasn't right for me, because the people that were teaching me were not experienced photographers and videographers themselves. They were teachers who had come out of a course and started teaching the thing that they studied. So I have always said that, and this is where sometimes people can kind of take me in the wrong way, and this is not meant as a slight on anyone. If that's what you want to do and you are proficient enough to do it, absolutely great, go and do it, because the world needs more education, and it needs better education, that's the thing. So go and get the experience. You know, I see so many students, graduates, they come out of university and they think they are ready to go and be professional photographers, you know, and professional videographers without any real industry experience, because someone who also thought they were ready told them that they were ready. You know, come out of university, go and get a job in a studio, temping on weekends, you know, shuffling paperwork at first, making cups of tea, painting the set. That's what I did. That's what thousands of other photographers have done. And it's the best way to learn, because all those little things come together and they build into a career at the end of it. It's not a job, it's a career, it's a vocation, it's something that you do because you love it.
It's fascinating because I teach kind of 16 to 18 year olds on the whole, and over the years less and less are going to uni, but a degree in an art is unbelievably not required. I saw recently, I think there was they started to do degrees in tattoos, and all the tattoo artists on my feed were just like, we don't need that. Like, we know we have a system. Like, you apprentice, you learn on the job, and you become an artist, a tattooist. Now, I'm sure there are things like maybe if you had a degree in fine art, but I don't know how relevant that is. I've always tended to struggle with imposter syndrome, even as a teacher. Like, who am I to be standing in front of them? So I went the other way and did overkill and did way too much. And But you're right. I think if you want to be a filmmaker, go be a filmmaker. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think you should have been a filmmaker when you were 7. Like, if it's an art, I think it's a really weird thing to get to like 16, having never touched a camera before or something, or picked up a paintbrush, and then say, oh, I'm a photographer, I'm a filmmaker, I'm an artist. It's like, you would have known, or I'm a performer now, I'm going to do acting. And I know there's people who do that, so I'm not correct. Like, I think Tim Roth one day was just, oh, I'm going to be an actor. I just wanted to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I am like Natalie and Imbruglia. I'm kind of torn. It's like, I don't need, I just think.
Yeah, that's a name I haven't heard in a few years, but that's showing our age there.
But I just think I've got with a 4-year-old daughter at the moment. She loves dance, she loves acting, and she loves drawing. And I think I don't know how she's going to evolve, but I would imagine she's going to be an artist. So I don't know. I like I said, I'm torn. I think maybe you can. Maybe you just didn't have the opportunity to be a photographer when you were young, or maybe it morphs. That's the other thing, that you were interested in, say, storytelling, and then you were a kid, and then you decide to tell stories through photography. Maybe
it's funny actually, because even as a commercial photographer, I'm a big fan of narrative in visual content. So generally, even in my commercial photography, I love it to have that kind of almost cinematic kind of flow and energy to it, so it feels like you are switching on the television halfway through an action movie, for instance. If it's say, for instance, the photography that I did when I was working with a museum group, we did some photography at one of the rail infrastructure kind of control sites. So it's this massive complex. It's something like the CIA would have, and they said, well, actually, we want some shots showing the kind of the look and the feel of it, and it's really techy, and it's kind of like CSI. So we did these shots, and they said, well, we kind of want them to have a sense of urgency to them, because this is such an intense job. And so, you craft the images around the narrative that maybe not even you want to convey, but someone else wants to convey, and that's what feeds into being a good photographer that knows how to tell a story with a single image or a very short series of images. And I think, you mentioned fine art and photography share all the same principles, all the same, the 5 elements of composition, line, tone, light, and everything else. And it's also shared with design, graphic design. You have the principles of Gestalt, so everything ties in. And so you can go from having a degree in fine art to being a photographer. You'll most likely end up doing fine art photography, which is what my lecturers wanted me to do. I didn't want to do that because it just wasn't for me. So I think definitely this is the thing about creative industries. There are so many possibilities. There are so many avenues to explore, and there are so many untapped, raw talents out there. That there are kids that, at 4 years old, well, you'll have to excuse me. The sun just came out, and it's bright. At 4 years old, they're laid on their tummies on the carpet in the living room, drawing out their favourite Disney characters. And then when they get to 20, they're still, sitting in a ball on the bed, sketching out original characters. And then by the time they get to 40, they've been an animator for the last 10 years, working for, various companies. And that career really started when they were 4.
Yes.
The seeds of it were already there. But it's an interesting one. It's a massive subject. That's the thing.
I think there's an element of, there's other filmmakers on the course, and other filmmaking lecturers, and Paddy in particular, like, he can't not talk about film. and if he's walking the dog, he'll have his phone and it'll be playing something, and he'll be listening on his earphones. He's continuously consuming, continuously learning, and he's just pure filmmaker. It just and I'm the same in terms of what I do, and I know that like doing stuff like this sometimes feels a bit like ego orientated, and it feels like if I do a live on Facebook, if I write an article, it's like, well, why do people want to hear from me? But at the same time, I get deeply unhappy if I haven't like created something or put something out into the world. And I think that's, as you're saying, with like a 4-year-old, and my daughter at the moment loves YouTube channels when it's like sped up, that they're drawing Disney princesses, and she just sit watching, and she says, oh, I wish I could draw like that. And then she goes and gets a pen and she starts drawing, and her artistic ability has jumped forward like in the last, since we're in lockdown, because she's watching this person draw Disney princesses. And she's like, sometimes you don't need a lecturer, you just need to do and be inspired, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, in general, people learn a whole lot better from doing rather than just being shown. And weirdly, something like YouTube allows people to fill that gap, especially in times like these, with lockdown. I mean, it's not artistic, it's not creative in any way, but I learned how to fix part of my car because it needed doing, and I wanted it doing during the last 3 months. And so I bought the parts, and I watched YouTube videos of a guy taking a car apart and doing it. So, and it's being able to find the motivation, to find the drive to be able to go and do it. And, obviously your daughter watching those videos, I find it mesmerizing. So I can't imagine what it feels like for a 4-year-old watching something like that appear on screen,
Exactly, it's magic. And going back to photography and storytelling, that's, for me, I talk a lot about the magic of art and communication, because it's stunning to me that we're communicating now, we're making noises with our mouth, and we can use that noise to make someone happy or make someone sad, and we can have an impact on the world, on the ecosystem. And on my phone, even now, I keep certain photographs that tell a story and have an impact on me, and it's predominantly, and has always been, to do with kind of unpacking racism, because I'm aware that if you grow up in the West, I've probably picked up some racism. I'm probably just not aware, and I would never act on it, but it's naive to say, if I look at my favorite movies, they're predominantly kind of white-based movies, predominantly white heterosexual movies, really. So I've got an image of, it's from the Southern American border, the American border, and it's I think it's ICE, and have arrested a woman, and there's this kid like 4 years old just crying, looking up, and I just want to hug her. And there's another one, I think it's Tibetan, of, it looks like a 3-year-old hugging his 2-year-old sister, and I just think we were all like that at some point, and it really helps me to have compassion. So so storytelling, it's why this is called Keyhole Storytelling. In terms of, is there any particular photographer or photo that you've seen, or that you think, wow, that had an impact on me? Because I'm talking a lot, but another two just occurred to me, is the Vietnam ones, right? There's the one.
I was just going to say exactly that.
Yeah. Okay, go for it.
the burned girl, walking out of a Vietnamese village. And I don't want to be too graphic, because I don't know when people are going to be listening to this, but it's bad, isn't it? It's you would have to have truly a heart of stone if you didn't look at an image like that and you weren't affected by it. And a few years ago, I remember I went across to Montenegro and Croatia, and we went to an art photography gallery, and they had an exhibit of photographs from the civil wars, okay? And some of them were images of guys in uniform, and that was it. Others were images of families literally standing in the rubble of their homes, and others were kids proudly posing behind us, next to a sign that had mortar shell damage on it. And to kind of consider how different my life was to the people that were in those photos, but knowing how important it is for people in a position of privilege like us to be able to actually help to kind of convey those stories, because like you say, we've been raised in a very westernized, white, cis heteronormative environment. And so whether it's children who are a victim of war or famine, or whether it's, you know, articles on, say, for instance, Marsha P. Johnson on the front lines of the Stonewall movement, it's important for us to be able to take stock and consider our privilege, and especially when it comes to even things like education. You know, people in the UK, we are very lucky in that we tend to have a certain amount of privilege, even if you don't go to university, if you don't go to college, if you know, don't do any of that stuff, by virtue of largely being raised in a country where we are quite free to do and think as we want to. You know, there are people in the world who grow up in captivity by virtue of their governments.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get too political, obviously, because it's, again, that's a massive subject. But in terms of creativity and what the creative arts industry can bring to that, it is about storytelling. It's important for us to be able to reflect on that in our work.
We're seeing a lot of there's always been a kind of crapping on the arts, as though they're not important, they haven't been prioritized in school a lot of the time. You know, the Sir Ken Robinson does some great TED Talks and great books about how the arts should be right up there with English and maths. It should be equal. And the reason I think it gets dismissed, and as a media lecturer, and media gets seen as a soft subject, is because it has that power of storytelling. It has that power to change the world. And if you think about anything that's had an impact, whether it's, you know, the Martin Luther King Jr. "I Have a Dream" speech, or Kennedy saying about putting a man on the moon, we know that because the media captured it. And as you're talking about with Stonewall and photographs from that, from Vietnam, it has the power to change the world. And I have this feeling, and I don't know where I got it from, but it always feels that totalitarian governments, or even, you know, normal governments, come down on the artists because they're the ones who can get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, art very much is driven by emotion and emotional response, and it also drives emotional response in the masses, you know, and that's why art, literature, music is often the first, you know, the first wave of things to go in countries where you find, or in, you know, environments where you find a totalitarian authority in play, because arts allow people to mobilize, you know. And it's what we're seeing right now, you know, with a lot of the protests going on. And there's been some really creative alternatives to what most people consider is the normal route of protest, which, you know, largely people think that protest has to be violent. It doesn't have to be violent. Art can be protest. There's some brilliant material out there on strike art and protest art, and, you know, even from the street art movements, you know, back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, that it was a protest. It was going against the grain. It was going against the establishment. And art has always been a driving force for change. It's a vehicle for change, and it always has been. And I'd like to think that it always will be. Just look at propaganda for a start.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it can carry terrible messages, but it can be beautiful. Look at the exploitation movies of the 1950s through to the 70s. The posters on those were so weird, but they were gorgeous, you know, in their weird kind of lo-fi way, you know. So the message and the medium can be very, very different, but they can also be intrinsically linked. If you look at Marshall McLuhan's work, he very much goes into that. In the medium is the message, you know. He talks about mass media. He talks about culture being changed by this 20th century revolution, from art being something that is purely visual to carry a narrative of, you know, kind of an elite, the people who know, to being a voice for the masses.
Yeah.
And to an extent, it always has been a voice for the masses, but actually it was, you know, until very recently, and even now, there is still a bit of a stigma that art is an elitist thing. You know, to be an artist, to be a creative, you know, it's a privilege thing. And it doesn't have to be like that. I want people to be able to see that if their kids say that they want to be animators, if they want to be
Yeah.
artists, if they want to be, if someone comes to me and says, I want to be a sculptor, but my parents want me to be a mechanic, I'm like, look, I'm go and do what you want to do. My parents always did that with me. They were very supportive of the fact that I didn't want to be an engineer. My dad was an engineer. I didn't want to be a hairdresser. My mum was a hairdresser. Not that you can tell because lockdown had, but it's it's a very emotive subject for a lot of people, is the connection of literally art and emotion. And yeah, it's an organic thing, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, and I think something I've been embedding with my students in the last few years is kind of how I started talking about leadership, is because I suddenly realized that being like a storytelling expert and understanding like media and having students who are creating animations, music videos, films, it's like if you're an artist, you have great power, like more power than you can possibly comprehend, probably. And with that great power comes great responsibility.
Great responsibility, absolutely.
If you're going to create art, what impact do you want to have in the world? And even if that's just like a lot of the time, obviously, we were in Cumbria, so our students would cast genuinely or write white characters. And all the time, I'm like, why is there no people who aren't white here? And they're like, oh, I don't know anyone. I'm like, so you're going to have to go out and find an actor who isn't white. Like, you're being like racist by deletion. You're just, and I don't want them to kind of do positive discrimination. Oh, I've got to plug in like a person of color just because of reasons. But the fact that there's never any is,
and that is something that we do need to definitely combat. I mean, by virtue of a lot of the work that I produced and a lot of the opportunities that I had when I was early in my career, and I was working in Hull, in the East Riding of Yorkshire, which again is in terms of demographic, it's very similar to Cumbria. So yeah, we didn't really have the opportunity to naturally go out and socialize with people of color from different communities. It wasn't until probably around about 2016 when I moved back into Hull city centre. I was working and living in the city centre, and I was living in a part of the town where it was a melting pot, and it was great. And it was just on the edge of the student area, but it was also on the edge of the area where you had a large Iranian population, a Syrian population, and there was a Caribbean population, a Chinese population. And it was great because, it was just this tapestry of cultures, and it was beautiful. And I think that's something that we really need to encourage people to go out and experience and explore. And I've, again, from a place of privilege, I've had a lot of opportunities to travel in recent years. And I don't go on holidays, we go on travel experiences. And being able to go to places like, say, for instance, we went to Central Asia a few years ago. And it's honestly one of the best experiences that I've ever had. But the countries that we went through, we were pretty much like the only 6 white British people, probably for hundreds of miles, thousands of miles maybe, I don't know. But it was actually a really freeing experience, that you couldn't rely on the language that you'd spoken all of your life, that you've been told everyone else speaks it, so it's fine. We couldn't rely on that. And we're relying on the kindness of strangers. One guy that we met at the border between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan was a guy called Mohammed. He just happened to be a filmmaker that had been working across the United States, and he was waiting to go home. And so we met him in a cafe by chance in Andijan. And the kindness of strangers came through, because he was just like, okay, well, I tell you what, I need to get across the border anyway. There's obviously a bit of a language barrier, so I'm Kyrgyz. Why don't I help you across, and I'll make sure you kind of get a hotel for the night. And because by that time it was late, and it was just crazy.
I'm just in awe. Like those countries, I would never consider going there. I think I have fear. I don't understand. Like I've been to like Southeast Asia, but Southeast Asia feels like, you know, like Thailand and Malaysia feel like the touristy. Like I know I'm going to see loads of people who speak English for start.
Exactly, and largely there's a very tourist-driven areas as well. You know, when I was out in Vietnam, I went to shoot a wedding out there, and largely everywhere I went, because it was a touristy area, everyone knew some English. You know, going across to somewhere like Marrakesh, people generally know English or French, obviously by virtue of it being formerly a French colony. So it's a lot easier for you to be able to break down those language barriers if you know a basic amount of a second language like French or German, and also going to a place where, you know, every other sign is written also in English. And also where you have largely Latin script as well, you know. But we went to Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And it was the best experience of my life. Honestly, the people were so welcoming and friendly, and it was an experience, because there was the culture side of it was just absolutely incredible. You have this fusion of, you know, former Soviet architecture in somewhere like Tashkent, and then we went to Bukhara and Samarkand, where it was all this beautiful Islamic geometric design on these beautiful madrasas and temples, and it was just, yeah, it was like visiting a different world. It was literally like a different world. It was
totally, yeah, with a sudden desire to just go proper traveling. I think you're right. I don't like the idea of holidays, because the idea of needing a break from your life. I think we'll take a look at your life and why you need like a break. But the idea of going traveling to be curious, to be what's out there, I just think, oh, that's amazing. And to go to countries like that, well, so what are you going to say?
No, I was just going to say, if you want to have an idea of what that experience is like, there's actually a really good book by Peter Frankopan. It's called The Silk Roads. And that's a very good starting point for you or anyone else that wonders what it's like to
one of the things I love about Snapchat, which I think is still happening, is you can go to the map and you can scroll to anywhere on the planet, and there's hotspots. So you can scroll over to Afghanistan, see a hotspot, and see what they're doing. And the overwhelming majority is they're just like us. They're having breakfast and taking the piss out of each other.
Absolutely, and listening to very, you know, similar, you know, musical styles, and driving the same cars and everything else. Yeah, it's. But I think it's important that people push themselves to have experiences and to want those experiences. That's the difference. You can have those experiences but not want it. Yeah. It's important to learn how to seek out and how to want those experiences, because it enriches your life.
Exactly. And then I remember there's Snapchatters in North Korea, and it's their cat playing. I'm just like, you're all the same. And just going back to propaganda, there was a guy called Spankmeyer. It was, I think it was in Czechoslovakia, and when I guess it was World War II, the Germans banned loads of art, obviously, because it's powerful. It's our magic tool. But they didn't see animation as formidable. They thought it was just for children. So Spankmeyer started making all these really powerful propaganda pieces, just using clay and stuff to kind of get the message of hope and to stand up. And these symbols, we see them in movies, right? It's going to bring us nicely onto sci-fi, because Hunger Games with the Mockingjay, like anything could become a symbol. And it gives people hope. It's a way of communicating. It's a way of bringing people together. So, the reason I asked you on this is you said that sci-fi was one of those things that had given you meaning to life, or had allowed you to work out your relationship with the universe.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, it's weird because it works on a sliding scale. It helped me to work out my relationship with my dad, actually, in some ways, because he was an engineer. And so at a very young age, he had taken up this interest in engineering, and his father, my grandfather, had worked on the railways and what have you. And growing up in, you know, working class industrial town like Hull, he went and did basically what he was told he could do. So he went and became an engineer, but at least he loved the idea of it and he loved learning. And so years later, when I was young, he introduced me to science fiction through the big two, shall we say, the Star Trek and Star Wars. And it's funny because when people ask me, am I a fan of Star Trek or Star Wars? My answer is yes. Because they are, you know, largely, they fall into a lot of the same general categories, but they're very, very different in terms of the narratives. So we'll try and circle back around to that. But, you know, my dad had become a fan of science fiction because of the engineering aspect of it. And so he found it interesting that, for instance, Roddenberry envisioned this world where humans had gone beyond our base instincts and we developed a society that was technologically advanced, and we were starting to explore what's out there. Mm-hmm. But what it also introduced me to was this idea that actually through science fiction we can very much explore parts of our humanity that are otherwise inaccessible, shall we say, on the face of it. So alien races, you have someone like the Klingons, who are warlike, but they're also incredibly technologically advanced, except that all we see is the warlike aspect of them. But in several instances throughout all of the franchises, we know that they have philosophers, they have teachers, they have scientists. So they are a culture just as vibrant as ours. It's just that in terms of the dominant sort of society model that they use, they have these warriors that are glorified, and they're the ones that go out and do the work that actually, in place of just exploring, they're out there conquering, dominating. And I think it's an interesting one that through various other sci-fi genres and subgenres and franchises, as I grew up, you know, my dad and I would talk about these different ideas. So essentially, you know, you have something like Dune or Star Wars, which has a very much a religious aspect to it. In Star Wars, you have the Force. It's this binding essence that runs through everything in the universe. And in Dune, you have this kind of almost militant sort of control of a substance that allows basically dominance over the entirety of space. And so that's about power and about totalitarianism. In Star Wars, we see people fighting against regimes, totalitarianism, the Empire. And so it gave me a really good grounding on, of all things, human history, because it was like looking through a lens at alternatives for what we have the potential to become. And again, it's through that art, you know, the artistry of the filmmaking, the writing, the narrative, that we get to explore those sides of humanity. And it can often come as a warning. You know, at the same time as Star Wars and Star Trek, you had people like Alvin Toffler writing things like Future Shock, you know, which was a massive warning for the future. I have a copy of it, a very dog-eared copy of it, on my bookshelf, and it's a really interesting read. But by, you know, all accounts, it doesn't look good for us if we go a certain way. He talks about plagues, he talks about technological advances being used against us. So sci-fi for me was really a gateway to understanding the world that I was living in and the world that I could be living in, or my children could be living in. Yeah, and it's just an interesting one. It's just sci-fi was my vehicle to understanding. That was it.
I like it when sci-fi is spelled SCIPHI, because it's science philosophy, right?
That's
like it's interesting. In I don't know which Star Trek movie it is, but they go and find God, basically. This is such and then that turns into just, you know, technologically advanced or
well, yeah, it's actually a recurring theme throughout Star Trek. Oddly, a couple of the original series, well, actually, a number of the original series episodes dealt with this idea of idols and glorification and manipulating the masses of certain civilizations through, shall we say, what they would consider magic, but in actual fact, it was just advanced technology. And yes, you are right. In one of those, they met an entity that claimed to be God, and Kirk looks at this entity and says, okay, but you want our starship, you're demanding our starship. What would God want with a starship?
Totally.
And so in terms of that, that's very much understanding the separation between the ineffable and something that is purely effable, is completely understandable, it's completely tangible, because it's a physical being or a technology that's behind that request for their ship. And the other thing is, in The Next Generation, they encounter Q, who is a wonderful character, who is a recurring character through a lot of the franchises after. And he
feels like, I don't watch it that much, but he feels like a god, that he feels like he can do anything.
So exactly, but he's part of a race that are outside of space and time. And so to us, mere mortals, he appears as a god, and Picard challenges him. He says, no, you're not a god. You're just someone who's taking advantage of our disposition.
What I love about this is why I do love science fiction, and science fiction films tend to be the only ones I even show my students in full, because it's like a sugar-coated like pill, or it's a way of secretly teaching politics and religion and philosophy and everything like that. And just thinking about Star Trek there, just from the fact the TV show, I think, had the first mixed race kiss, I think, but also what you're talking about is talking to power, like, to do the extreme power of like a god and being like, are you really God? Like that level of critical thinking to inspire an audience to step back and be like, okay, what do I believe? Is my religion the real one? Can I question God or whatever? That's some really high level storytelling.
Yeah, I think for me, it kind of, I class myself as agnostic. I have in the past said, oh, maybe I'm atheist, but I can't be, because I believe in something. And so I have developed this kind of agnostic kind of viewpoint, and science fiction very much helped me to get there, because I look and I go, hang on, there's all these variations, there's all this rich tapestry of possibilities out there. How can I logically say that there is one for me, that there is one for everyone, and that all the others are completely wrong? And I think in terms of theology, as humans, we project our fears, our hopes, our wants, our desires, and our weaknesses into the void.
Yeah.
And often what we will receive back, I say the void, I mean the universe. And often what we receive back is, we look for patterns. So we look for signs, we look for ideas that give us a sense of fulfillment, of safety. And I think largely when it comes to, and this is just my opinion, other opinions are available, my way of understanding the world is that there is no one God, there is no one true essence other than everything that we see, the air that we breathe, the desk that I'm sitting beside, everything comes from the same material that was here at the very beginning of the universe. And it will always be there in some form, because it can't be erased. It can be changed, and it can change its form. So that gives me this idea that everything that was and is will be forever in some form. That doesn't mean that we're immortal, but it gives me the sense that if we look at energy, for instance, energy we know cannot be created or destroyed. It's only transferred from one form to another. And so I look at that, and people talk about human soul. Well, if we want to consider the soul as a source of energy or a type of energy, then it simply gets converted and passed from one vessel to another. And so in a way, I think it was possibly Stephen Hawking who said, we're all made of stars. And then Moby said it, and people listened to Moby more than Stephen Hawking in the 90s, that we're all made of stars. We're all made of star stuff. And I think that's really magical. I think it's a wonderful way to think that we're all one with everything.
I love the fact you use the word magical there. And I think the more I see kind of science developing and it filters down and to a level I can understand it, you're right. You just have to be questioning and curious, right? I think Elon Musk says, I think there's an 80% chance this is a simulation. I saw a paper the other day that was saying that the universe acts like a two-dimensional hologram. Like, I don't even know what that means. They're just like, this doesn't make sense. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned, obviously, magic, weirdly, is a word that's come up a few times in our conversation now. And Arthur C. Clarke has this wonderful, short, concise law. It's one of Clarke's 3 laws. And the third law is that to any sufficiently advanced technology appears to be magic to those who are not familiar with it, basically.
Yeah.
And I love that because genuinely, 1,500 years ago, so again, to quote another film, Agent K in Men in Black says 1,500 years ago, we knew that Earth was the center of the universe. 500 years ago, we knew the Earth was flat. And 5 minutes ago, you knew that we were alone in the universe.
Yeah.
And so when you start looking, you mentioned the idea of a simulation. That is one of the addendums to Fermi's paradox, which I don't know if you're familiar with Fermi's paradox. Okay. So going back to sci-fi again. The idea of making contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, other sentient beings, is one that has been a sci-fi trope for not just 20th century, but it's been going back for, millennia. If you look at a lot of ancient stories of, gods from the sky and everything else, what we're looking at with Fermi's paradox is this idea that actually the universe is so vast and the universe is so old that any sufficiently advanced sentient species may have come and gone already. They may not be listening to us. We may not have met them because there is some greater threat out there, and there's almost this policy of non-communication, which is absolutely terrifying, because that also implies that all these other sentient and advanced races are working together to almost isolate themselves. One of the theories is that humans are to be avoided because we're just not ready.
Yeah.
And we're almost being quarantined. And so in later years, one of the addendums that was added was that actually we might be living in a simulation. That actually it might be a simulation through which it's assumed that humans just make sure that we're living in this kind of this bubble, that there is no one else out there. The other idea is that that the whole solar system is a laboratory set up by some great extraterrestrial intelligence, as crazy as it sounds, and actually we're just being played to see what we'll do on our own.
I seem to remember Q a lot of the time getting involved in Picard's life because he's bored. And so I sometimes wonder if whatever we are, like in our cosmic kind of energy, in that reality, maybe it's outside of time and outside of physicality, that they're just bored. Okay, let's go see what it's like. And because I try and work out why there's so much cruelty in this world. And I just think in order to understand the meaning of life, you have to understand pain. And so I wonder if it's this weird organism, like the human race as one organism, just working out stuff. So, what happens if you do this? What happens if you do this to someone? And I like it, but
it's somewhere between the idea in Star Wars that without light you can't have dark, and without the dark you can't really appreciate the light. But also Douglas Adams, has this idea that actually the world is just a big computer.
That's it.
We're all mice in a lab experiment, and we're helping to figure out this quantum, this universal conundrum.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is 42.
That's
Yeah.
it. It's a numbers game, right? It's like, okay, well, now there's 7 billion of us. Well, hopefully one of us can work out what the meaning of life is and transcend, and there's an answer. It's interesting what I find with Star Wars as well. And it, actually, Star Trek did the same with Picard as a TV series. That was phenomenal. And that idea that he was trying to help the Romulans, and then the Federation said, no, we're going to let them die. And he was furious. And then and I was like fully on Picard's side. When then he challenged him at some point, and the commander, whoever it was, said, if we had helped them, like 7 races would have left the Federation. The Federation would have collapsed. So you think, well, you've got a greater good thing. You're allowing something horrific to happen for the greater good. And what I like with Star Wars at the moment, particularly with Rogue One, is the rebels aren't like whiter than white. They're not kind of purely good. And it's interesting we were talking about Vietnam, because I think certainly slightly because of the media, slightly because of what was happening with with that LSD and peace and love and whatever, is all of a sudden we saw war for the horrific thing that it is. And we tend to romanticize like World War I and World War II. But what we're seeing now with revisiting history is the English, the British did absolutely horrific things in that war, and have done globally. And in war, there's no good guys. And what I love about it, brings out the worst in us all. And what I love about Rogue One is, for me, it addresses that. And there's a point where the male lead says, I've done horrific things in the name of the rebellion, and this is a good thing. I want to do this good thing. And again, that's science fiction just being reflecting on the human condition.
It allows us to kind of understand more about ourselves. All those alien species in Star Trek, it doesn't matter which one you choose, they're all a reflection of part of our core humanity. You've got the Romulans, who are distrusting and cannot be trusted, and they are warlike, but they're also incredibly, they're adept with using spies, and they will, develop incredibly advanced technologies. But at the same time, you have, and the Cardassians the same, you have scientists and philosophers and the teachers and the parents, and there are points where even parts of the Vulcan history, who, if anyone doesn't know, Vulcans are a race who are governed entirely by logic, and they are peaceful because they suppressed emotion. That's the only reason they suppressed their emotion. The Romulans are an offshoot of Vulcans. They were Vulcans that refused to conform to that suppression of their emotions. And so out of that, you actually have a very warlike race, but you also have a very stoic race that are part of the same thing. And it's like you said, it's sci-fi, but you could consider that to be PHI. It's philosophy. It is science philosophy, but you also have, the idea that it's not science fiction as much as it's speculative fiction in some ways when we talk about the technologies involved. And it is, that's why it's such a great sounding board for our human experience. And even from a spiritual point of view, one of the characters, Ben Sisko, he's the commander of Deep Space Nine, and he finds out that he is actually part of some greater plan. That he's part of this calling that genuinely is spiritual in nature, and he doesn't understand it. He doesn't necessarily want it, but he knows it's just something that he has to do. And that's, on one of the franchises that actually was so deeply embedded in warfare and the idea of terrorism and the idea of rebellion and the crushing of oppressors to free people. It's an incredible tapestry. Roddenberry's universe is far more than just cowboys in space, which is how a lot of people see Kirk, for instance. It's incredible. And off the back of that, obviously Lucas's universe with Star Wars. You also have the likes of Battlestar Galactica. If you watch the 2004 relaunch of Battlestar Galactica in its entirety, that again comes back to asking questions about spirituality. It asks about synthetic humans. If you are synthetic, are you alive? Are you living? Are you experiencing? And it's a big question. Even Philip K. Dick explored that in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which then became Blade Runner. It's the main question in the entire of the film in Blade Runner. Roy Batty's character is obsessed with this idea that he's not real, but he's real.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's so much to unpack here. Like I like even with Hunger Games, I think at the end of the final one, she shoots the leader of the rebellion because she realizes that the rebellion is just going to become the new power, and it can feel demotivating, demoralizing, because it's like, well, how do you win? But I also like movies like Equilibrium, where they do that emotional suppression. They take a pill to get rid of, they take a daily pill to remove emotion, and so there's order. But again, art is outlawed. You can't have art.
I love Equilibrium. It's one of my favorite films, and it's purely because it's that wonderful combination of Fahrenheit 451, 1984. It plays on these ideas of, Brave New World, and this idea that actually remove the emotion, remove the will to fight for change.
Yeah.
From the human condition, and that is both terrifying and sad, and there are people out there that would have it that way if they could. Again, Christian Bale's character says no, this isn't right, because he's playing on his own trauma, his own life trauma.
Yeah.
You have this idea of the thought police. I mean, look at Alan Moore's work. You mentioned in one of your posts about how comic books had allowed you to gain an understanding of the universe, and you mentioned V for Vendetta. And that is an incredible work in itself. V for Vendetta and Alan Moore, his work, Constantine, you mentioned as well. These are all deeply flawed characters.
Yeah.
Deeply flawed characters. They're a reflection of humanity. V is angry. Constantine has lost all hope, all drive, because for him it's just a waiting game. And I think that's something that is actually quite well explored in the early 2000s film with Keanu Reeves playing John Constantine. It was a different take on the narrative, but it definitely, it was worth a watch, and it's definitely it serves a purpose. But yeah, I think in those speculative fictions, in that fantasy, in that science fiction, we definitely can find, it's a mirror. It's holding up a mirror to ourselves and kind of asking us to consider what we choose to be and what we naturally need to suppress in order to achieve the things that we want to achieve.
And there's lots of dialogue around at the moment around like emotional intelligence and the idea of managing your emotions. I think partly it came out of the well-being crisis we have and the mental health issues. And it's like, well, if you can just learn to have a relationship with your emotions and manage them, then you will be better off. And that's certainly been my journey. But at the same time, I like that phrase, I think from American Gods, that anger gets stuff done. And there's a lot of anger in the world right now, which I think is justified. You can feel it. But at the same time, I think emotions are one of our biggest sources of unhappiness.
Absolutely. It's, and that's the thing. There are lots of people, and again, this is just, we're just riffing on this. I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, but in terms of the violence that we've seen, the aggression that we've seen, because I think there is a difference between violence and aggression. Aggression can be pointed and justified and used as a tool. I think violence tends to be just something that is destructive by its very nature, and doesn't always have a point. It can just erupt into violence, and no one really knows why. The thing that we're seeing at the moment is the language of oppressors being used against them, because we've tried legislation, we've tried talking, we've tried peace, we've tried sit-ins, we've tried the singing, we've tried the fundraisers. And we wouldn't have a civil rights movement that has done what it's done now were it not for the fists being thrown in the 1950s.
Absolutely.
Were it not for Rosa Parks, were it not for Marsha P. Johnson. And you can't have, quite right, the message is that you can't have equality until you have LGBTQ rights. You can't have rights for people of colour until you have the rights for people with disabilities. You can't have equality until everyone genuinely is on a level playing field. And so sometimes you have to raise your voice, and sometimes you have to raise a fist, or you have to you have to throw a stone to cause the ripple.
I do have this theory that we've got like multiple personalities in our head, and I wonder if it's like it's this weird connection to all human beings that I can kind of model anyone. And I think with Alan Moore's Watchmen, in terms of looking at that through an emotional lens, you've got characters like Rorschach, that's how you pronounce his name, who is just like emotion. He's very, very angry at the world, and everything's got to be black and white, and there's right and wrong, and he will destroy himself for what he believes in. You've got the comedian who has just given up on life. Like, this is all a joke. Nothing matters. He's a nihilist. But then you've got Dr. Manhattan, who is like the Vulcan extreme of kind of logic, and it's just like he can see the universe through a different lens. So he'll say things like, oh, like 10 years ago we were first meeting and we had our first kiss. In 2 years she's screaming at me and we're breaking up. In 20 years she dies. And he can just see this timeline, and but eventually he just goes to Mars because he can't be done with humans anymore.
We've all had that feeling, I'm guessing.
It's like the drama of social media. That's the thing. That's why I keep thinking of Watchmen, is that I'll be watching what happens on Facebook and think, oh, I can't be doing with this anymore. Particularly again with images being misused as propaganda. So you'll have photos from 4 years ago of a policeman bleeding, and they'll use that and say, look at this at the Black Lives Matter protest. So do a Google search. That image wasn't from there.
Absolutely.
But images have power.
So I was just going to say, that comes back to photography, though, in a weird, nice sort of full circle. We started off talking about photography and the history of photography. We touched on slightly, and the fact is that photography is largely a tool, and it can be used to create art, but it's used as a tool as well. And we live in an age where you can't trust anything you see. You can't trust a photo. Never trust a photo. I will always say to people, don't trust a magazine cover, because they'll say, oh yeah, but they've photoshopped someone to look perfect. Yeah, well, you know what? They also Photoshop people to look worse than they actually do. They'll make sure they look a little bit redder in the face. They'll add 10 pounds. And you've just got to be so cynical of everything that you see. When I produce work, even, I hold myself to strict ethical codes, and I think most photographers do. The industry hasn't always catered for that, and quite often you will get employers who will not allow that because it loses them money by not allowing their photographers or their retouchers to slim that model down and make her 6'3". I mean, look at Kate Winslet back in the 90s. She sued, I think it was GQ, because they made her.
She said, "I don't look like that, and what more is, I don't wish to look like that."
Absolutely. And so, never trust a photograph, and you should never trust even historical photographs. Because there's an image of, I think it's Ulysses S. Grant, and it shows him on horseback in a battlefield, sort of quite triumphant, but it's quite a stoic image as well. And it's fake. The horse was real. The person riding it was real, but the person's head was swapped out for Grant's, and actually the head and shoulders came from a statue or something, or someone else in another image, and the background was actually taken from another battlefield that was 300 miles south, and it was actually far worse. And there's images of Joseph Stalin where he's had people cropped out because they fell out of his favor. And so before the image was allowed to go to press, he said, no, I want that person gone. And you can see where they're being retouched out. And that's going back to the early 20th century, the 1800s, and well before that. One of the first uses of photography was to create spirit photography. And it was just because it was a misunderstood science. People didn't understand that what they were looking at was a slow exposure. It was a long exposure. And so you have this idea of this veiled white wispy spirit walking up the stairs, and you can see these hands on the railing, but you can't see a face. You just see this form. And it's just it's science, but it's misunderstood science. And if you don't know what you're looking at, then it can appear as magic, or it can appear as truth. We've got to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't have an emotional reaction to that stuff, because it's not, it's probably not real. And video is getting worse now as well. There's videos of people putting themselves into Titanic. Like you'll get in probably the next year or two, we're going to have an app where you can just be in anything. You can be in Star Trek. You can just...
So I was recently at an AI Frenzy conference run by Barclays Bank, and one of the speakers there said that we already have problems with deep fake technology, and that there are three forms of AI. There's augmented intelligence, autonomous intelligence, and artificial intelligence. And the difference between them is slight from an expanded perspective, but actually once you get into it, they're very, very different things. And so you have something like deepfake, which is essentially it's autonomous intelligence. So it maps out features and looks for commonalities and places point A onto point B, which is fine. And it's an algorithm. It's a machine learning algorithm. But we also have artificial intelligences that are set up to be able to search out those inconsistencies for security purposes. And they've been used by security forces and intelligence gathering facilities around the world for the last 10 years. However, we're now getting to a point where the technology that's available on your smartphone or on your home editing software is able to fool these multi-million dollar programs that are set up to ascertain whether that is a real person or whether it's a fake.
Absolutely right.
And if we can do that, if we can falsify something to that level where even AI that's set up to hunt down this falsification cannot tell the difference, then I mean, we're in trouble. I mean, how do I know I'm even talking to you right now? It could be, it's the idea of Face Off, Nick Cage and John Travolta.
Yeah, and then you get to the point, I guess, to protect like stock market value. Like say when Steve Jobs died, they could have just said he didn't die. Like now they could just say he could still be giving presentations.
Well, when you think about it, that's what happened in Equilibrium. Spoiler alert, by the way, for anyone who hasn't seen Equilibrium, but that's one of the things that happens in Equilibrium because we're led to believe that the Chancellor is still alive.
Of course.
And he isn't. It's actually one of his subordinates who's taken on the role, and actually they're just using computer technology to mask him and change the voice, and that's...
I have to watch that movie again. For anyone who could hear my daughter crying in the back, she's fine. She's with her mum. She's getting cuddles, but she's...
Oh, that's good.
She watches lots of Disney, and she has mastered the art of the Disney princess tantrum.
I think we can all learn a lot from Disney as well. I think for all that Disney is, it does. It's a weird one actually, because my partner and I the other night were just like, what are we going to watch? And we ended up watching a double bill of Frozen.
Oh, nice.
And it was weird. It was weird to look at it because I knew that obviously we'd be talking about this, and it deals a lot with magic, and it deals a lot with perception, and it deals a lot with how we reflect on the world around us based on our current set of ideals and knowledge and everything else. And so it's an interesting one that you should mention that, and definitely everyone needs cuddles right now. I think
everyone needs what?
Everyone needs cuddles right now.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's an emotional time, So.
And those movies, like watching them with her, like even Little Mermaid and things, I cry more. At 43 years old, I cry more at stuff than I've ever done before. And I don't know if that's part of like getting older or having more compassion, but I can't even deal. Like Frozen 2, that scene where she's like basically depressed in the cave, and she's like, just one more step. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could barely make it through Let It Go, singing all the way through that, because I think the older we get, the more experiences we build up, and the more we can relate to those, what seem like very trivial things, you know, sort of what can be a happy, bouncy song or reflective song in, say, something like Mulan, for instance. You know, that can largely be seen as a transgender narrative. You know, and you look at stuff like Lion King. That's obviously, it's about loss and dealing with bereavement, and it explores the stages of bereavement. You know, the guilt tripping yourself. You know, and it's important stuff. I mean, the one that I can't make it through all the way without breaking down entirely is The Land Before Time. You know. Like,
oh wow, I haven't seen that. I saw it at the cinema. I haven't seen it since.
Right. and so it's back on Netflix, and I keep saying to myself that I'm going to challenge myself to watch it, but I know no, I'm not going to make it through. It's just too much.
And then, you know, Let It Go became an anthem worldwide, I think. And there was countries, I think there was people in Korea who were just using it as a way of expressing themselves and being recognized. Again, it's just power. It's influence and power, and it's phenomenal.
Look at you know, This Is Me from The Greatest Showman. Yeah, instantly it became an anthem for the hi.
My daughter's just dressed as Princess Anna today.
I was going to say, is that Princess Anna? That's a beautiful Princess Anna dress. It's this thing of, you know, we make these grand sweeping gestures in our fiction. And so whether it's something like Star Trek, or whether it's something like The Greatest Showman or a Disney movie, those gestures of understanding, kindness, you know, freedom of thought, expression, and just being who we want to be, and it's an important thing. You know, it runs through everything. And some of us find it through Captain Kirk and Picard and Janeway. Others find it through Anna and Elsa and you know, Olaf. You know, Olaf is a wonderful character for that.
And as parents, we're very aware of the media programs you. Like you become, your values and beliefs can be warped by it, as we were talking about with sci-fi and comics. For her, thankfully, one of her favourite, even though Pocahontas is a rather problematic movie, the song "Colour of the Wind" is phenomenal. It's all
beautiful. Absolutely, and it is. You know, it's and it's one of those where actually, when you really look at that's the great thing about Disney songs. Actually, the lyrics, the stories that they tell, the narratives that they weave without even having to watch the movie, it's absolutely incredible.
I think the line in "Colour of the Wind" is, "You think the only people that are people are the ones who look and think like you."
Look and think like you. Yeah, absolutely, and you know, that line particularly kills me every time I hear it, because it makes me just think of all the things that are wrong with human behavior towards each other. You know, and this is part of Tony's paradox, that, you know, maybe they just don't want to be around us.
Yeah.
Sad but true.
And it's all programmed, right? Like Evie at 4 years old, there's no racism, there's no homophobia. She's just happy and thinks everything's beautiful and wonderful.
It's one of the reasons that, you know, when you look on social media, there's videos of children, you know, playing in a park.
Yeah.
And they're going around, they're hugging each other, they're playing, they're peaceful, they're laughing, and these could be kids from so many different communities, and it wouldn't matter, because as far as they're concerned, everyone's equal. It doesn't matter whether they're male or female, or whether they identify as somewhere in between. It doesn't matter whether they are from a rich community, or, you know, it doesn't matter. And I wish that kind of thinking continued beyond our childhood, but we are programmed. And I think largely, it's because the old-fashioned education systems were made and set up to produce people who are compliant workers.
Exactly right. I'm hoping, from what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, education, I think, is changing from when I was there, and you know, we're looking at schools there now, and it is getting more hopeful. But yeah, we can kind of wrap it up there on that really nice note of acceptance and seeing the world through a child's eyes. And I think if you do have everyone needs to do the inner work. But if you do have like an ism, or you're scared of somebody, just reach out and talk to them. Like if you don't know any Muslims, please go find one, find one on social media, and have a conversation.
And it's just like communication. Communication is key, and whether you're talking about business or whether you're talking about art, whether you're talking about community, just talk. Just find, because believe me, we're all a lot more similar to each other than we are different.
Exactly right.
At the end of the day.
That's it. And we all even though we live in different stories and we're being different people at different times, we're all mortal, and we're going to face the same thing. We're facing our mortality. We're trying to work out, we're back we meat bags standing on a rock hurtling through space. Our ego tries to tell us differently, but we're all facing the same big questions. Why are we here? And what's our plan?
That's it. And on that, I'm reminded of two very different but equally poignant notes. One is The Blue Dot, which is the monologue by Carl Sagan, which again, I get about 5 minutes into it and I just break down in tears. And the other is the Galaxy song from The Meaning of Life, the Monty Python's The Meaning of Life. There's that line that says that, just remember that you're standing on a planet that's evolving and revolving, around the sun, hurtling at 19 miles a second, so it's reckoned. It's a wonderful combination of accepting our mortality, and also saying that, well, just because we're here for a short time doesn't mean we can't make something of a difference.
That's it. Steward leadership, that we're supposed to make things better for us being here, and we're supposed to make the world a better place, or relationships better. Like our impact should have been positive. And but anyway, Scott, you've been an absolute delight to talk to. I love that was really fascinating. It's going to be interesting listening to it back, because it felt like we had planned themes, and yet we moved between them really nicely.
And it just sort of happened, which is the best way. So I've really enjoyed my time here. So thank you ever so much for having me. It's been great.
No problem at all.